Hi, I'm Liz Whiteacre. Today we're going to talk about how you can respond to feedback that you've received from readers. Our goals today are to think about ways we can respond to those micro and macro level comments that we get from readers, either in a workshop setting or maybe we've asked someone to take a look at our work one on one. Thinking about how we can respond to, hey, good job. I really enjoyed it. And also, varied advice. What if different readers are telling you different things about your poems? And finally, thinking about revising individual poems within a larger body of work. Let's say you're working on putting together a chapbook. What might you need to think about as you're preparing that one poem to be part of a much larger um, narrative or experience for your readers? It's important that you understand what your goals are before you start to revise. Sometimes poems are very easy to dive into because we feel like they are at the very beginning of things and we are totally open and flexible to letting it be what it is. Right? Let's explore this. No, let's do this. Other times it's hard to think about moving all the furniture in the room, right? It's hard to think about, oh, I've already repainted that wall 7 times. I don't know. And I'm not even sure how much I like this new color. So it is harder in some moments to revise than it is in others. So you do want to think about, why am I sitting down to work on this poem? Another thing that's important to consider is, what am I hoping this poem will bring to readers? It might be an emotion that you hope readers will feel. It might be putting a story or a particular background for the speaker into the reader's minds. It might be helping them understand an emotion or a meditation on something. It might be painting beautiful imagery for them that they can appreciate. If you understand what your goals are before you start looking at feedback and working on your poem, it can help you make choices. If you think, oh, that is a really cool idea, but that's not what I'm really trying to do here in this poem, I'm going to save that suggestion for another poem, or start something new. That can be really helpful and make you feel like you're not all over the place. So, setting an intention is a great thing to do before you start that revision process. It's also important that you trust what your readers are telling you about their experience reading your poem. You trust what you're hoping to accomplish with your poem. You trust in the process of revision that even in um, pruning that tree. I've just started pruning trees and I always get so nervous. Well, if I cut this back here and here, is it going to grow back again? Is it going to harm it in some way? But if we go back to this idea of saving our drafts along the way, even if we cut too much, even if we play too much and experiment too much and push the poem to a place where it's unrecognizable, and it's not exactly what we hoped for, well, we can always go back. So think about that record keeping system that you've set up and how it can serve you. Because if you think, okay, well, this poem is here and this is how people are responding to it right now, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to work, play, see what I can create and make it a little bit closer to my vision. Or the feedback you've gotten, you might have spot on. That's exactly what I was trying to achieve, in which case maybe you don't need revision to do. But if you are open and mindful and really explore the possibilities that you can in that moment, that's going to help you in this process. And help you recognize when a poem might feel quote unquote finished, and also maybe recognize when I am just not getting there. This might be a poem I need to stick in that drawer and shut it away for a little while and come back to it in the future when maybe I'll be more prepared to perhaps resolve it. Maybe I can't resolve it right now. I need to live a little bit more and get a different perspective, and then I can finish that poem. So, macro level comments, if you remember, are going to be feedback from readers that are big picture, right? What does this poem mean? How did I feel when I was reading it? What am I kind of walking away from the poem with? How might this be fitting into other poems I've read by you? What are some questions I'm having because I'm struggling in different moments? So, kind of big thing. And I always recommend that you start with the big comments, because taking time to make edits to line breaks and changes, little words and stuff, if you put all of that time into those smaller things and then decide, oh, I don't even need that stanza, it can be a little disheartening. Not that you didn't strengthen those skills and they'll pay off in the future, but it can be disheartening to, work on the tiny details and then realize, oh, that whole thing I spent hours on needs to go, or maybe be moved into its own document for its own poem. So starting with the big things is what I personally choose to do, and then I move more towards the specific detailed comments. I wanted to share with you a poem that I have received feedback on recently. So, this is a poem that I shared with a group of readers, and on the right, you can see a bunch of different comments that are in there, and the lines and track changes are kind of loosely associated with the areas of the poem that people were commenting on. These were notes that I took during the conversation. So you're not seeing what a reader like typed up and presented to me. This was more of, hey, people are talking about my work. What are all of the different things that they're saying? I wanted to talk about a few of the macro level strategies that I got here, and how I would respond to those comments. So one of the biggest one, we'll start there. One of the readers said that the speaker in the poem wants to travel to school and she can't because of disability. I want more from this poem, more information, more examples. You could do something pretty with the brother in the poem, adding a parallel situation. And then the comment right below it, the college plan was my favorite out of the three. I loved how the narrator speaker compares their experience to the Wizard of Oz. I like all of the imagery from the Wizard of Oz in the poem, and I think that there could be a few more references to it. I love how we learn about the speaker and their family. I like the length of it. I think that all of the poems are similar in length. I think that this last one could have more examples and comparisons, but not too much more. I think it works I think it works the way it is right now. So, in these two comments, what I'm hearing as the poet, as the writer, is that my intention is currently there. In the poem, I wanted to present a moment where a speaker who needs to be in a wheelchair can't participate in a study abroad experience because the school where where she's at and where she's going can't accommodate her wheelchair. It's not accessible to her, and her disappointment in that moment, hearing that she won't get to go to that other country. And so I'm hearing from readers, and I heard in the conversation that that small bit is coming across pretty clearly in the poem. And I also learned that people were curious about my speaker, which isn't a bad thing, right? I've put someone on the page who is interesting to the readers. They want to know more about what's going on, more about the people in this person's world. There's a moment just next to the box where it says, "Who are these three friends? I want more details." They're kind of mentioned offhand as having been helpful, but we don't know specifically why. Um, and I'm also hearing that some of the allusions and the similes that were being created between the speaker and Dorothy going to the land of Oz and the people that she met there are being understood by readers. I thought it was interesting that people got the base intention of the poem but still wanted more. They wanted the poem to be longer, that they were interested in more comparisons between Dorothy and the speaker. um, the that last one there, this shows the mindset of the speaker, who is able to stay positive and forge ahead to where they want to go. So the vibe is there, people are understanding what's happening. The poem, you could say, is successful as it is. We can come back to it here, that there aren't moments that are presenting obstacles where the reading and understanding of what's going on is breaking down. So, as a poet, I have to think about this poem and what my goal is. Do I want to be intentionally mysterious? Am I writing a sequence of poems from this person's point of view where this is the point of this poem, and you might learn more about the brother and the three friends, and right, some of these different obstacles in other poems, and they're meant to be read in a particular order where you're getting short bites one after another. And then if that's not the case, well, is this a poem that might be worth exploring additional uh, parallels or some more explanation for the reader so that they can really appreciate why perhaps the reader, I'm sorry, the speaker feels the way that they do. So I'm going to have to think about it. Some things that I could do is save that draft and in a new draft, kind of copy and paste it in, or just do a free write where I explore what are some more parallels between the speaker's situation and Dorothy's in The Wizard of Oz, play around with that, develop a bunch more material, right? Explain more about the family life, the friend life, the life on campus. I might write, a couple paragraphs, 4, 5, 6 pages, depending on how I'm feeling about it and how quickly the ideas are coming to me. And then once I have that down on the page, then think about, okay, is there anything here worth including? Maybe I've created a new poem that could be a companion to this. And so sometimes when people are wanting more, and it's not out of, I don't understand what's happening, but it's more of, I'm curious about the speaker and the world that they are presenting to me, doing just some writing, just some free writing, exploring, can be helpful and benefit the poem sometimes. And then, of course, if there was, whoa, we think it's about this, but this is not what I had intended at all, then I want to use those comments individually to try and figure out, well, where is it that people are going down a particular path that I didn't intend them to go down? And then those would be really specific moments that I'd want to focus on revising, clarifying, maybe changing up the form if it's a matter of enjambment and going from stanza 1 to stanza 2 and people are not following that cognitively, maybe I do make a leap in the poem somewhere and come back, and that leaves people dizzy and confused. And then there are micro level comments, and you can see here I zoomed in to just a small detail from that picture of the beautiful blossoms on the tree a couple slides ago. And those micro level comments are those ones in the line, the ones that are smaller, more specific. So here I pulled in a moment where there's in the original poem, the line, no question, I started following the tracks my brother made. And then there's a stanza break until I found my own way through the unfamiliar terrain. And so here, someone has gone in and suggested adding, right? I started following the tracks my brother made. We weren't in Kansas anymore. I found my own way. And so they've removed a word, they've added in kind of that well known quip of, "Oh, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore, Toto," kind of pulling in a little bit more of the movie as an example of this is what I mean by more. And so to me, that's helpful to see what people are talking about when they say they want more. And then it kind of shows me in my document, oh, this is how it could look. But again, ultimately, it's my poem, and I might love a suggestion and be totally excited about it. And other times I might think like, that's not really me. Like that's cool, but that's not really me. And so I would need to really think a lot about what is the value added to the poem by pulling in that language from the film and book. How will readers respond to that? Or sometimes maybe does it make it a little bit more like an inside joke, right? If you don't know the dialogue well, is that something that people will get? And so you kind of have to walk that line. A couple other micro level strategies I wanted to highlight. I think that after reading the poem, I would like to see the title as a reference to Oz. So that was something that several people suggested. You could even title it Not in Kansas Anymore. So again, when you're hearing the same thing in the same way or sometimes different ways from multiple readers, that might be something that you want to listen to and say, well, the people have spoken. They're really thinking this is a good idea. So that can be beneficial as you're looking through feedback. Why one word? I took the word bushwhacked and it's a compound, and so someone was questioning that. And then there was another discussion about the last line where it ended on a very, very short sentence. And some people felt when they were reading it on their own, they responded differently than when they heard me read it out loud. And here I have varied responses. Some people said, I don't know, could you maybe change that to make it different when we read it in our heads? Other people said, no, 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 I like it the way it is. And again, there's a balancing act. I think it's important to remember you are never going to please everybody. I think Kurt Vonnegut, oh, he said something about, if you just kind of throw open the window and try to write to the whole world, you're going to catch a cold. And so going back to what am I trying to do here, right? Using your intentions as that touchstone can help you navigate these types of comments and make decisions. Yes, that makes very, very good sense to me, or I don't know about that, or wow, people did not have a problem with this at all and I totally thought they would, or wow, people are really taking this in a different way than I intended. And so every poem is going to be unique. If you work with a poem like this, come up with a new draft, share it with the same or new readers, probably you're going to get different feedback on a different day. And so it's always important to keep in mind that at the end of the day, it's your poem, you're the one making the decision, and you don't have to please the general reader of all time. People will always have their opinions. So go back to your small target audience and work for them to understand what you're trying to communicate. And hopefully, once that's happened, a wider audience will also have that understanding and appreciation as well. I wanted to take a moment to talk about good job. This is awesome. Great work. And that's it. That's the only feedback you get. And this will happen sometimes during a cold reading. We've talked about that before, where you are say, "Hey, look at my poem." Boom. and the person is trying to respond very immediately and they don't have time to think about their response. Other times you might share a poem with a reader, a week or two goes by, and they come back and they're like, it's perfect. I have nothing to say. I don't know what to tell you. And so a couple of things that you can consider. If you know your goal, and you can ask that person, well, what did you think it was about? Like, what did it mean to you? And if what they say back, you're like, that's exactly it. Well, you might have achieved your goal, at least with that particular audience, and you now kind of have a proof of concept that it's working. It was successful. Maybe you're at a point in that poem where it is, good job, perfect. It's ready to move out into the world and be shared more widely. If you're a little, I don't know about that, right? That my mom always loves everything I write, so maybe I need to check in with somebody else, get a second opinion, as people say. You might shift your audience a little bit and move from your more intimate group of readers to one a little bit broader, or share it with someone who you wouldn't anticipate them saying good job, or share it with that person who always loves to play devil's advocate, right? So you might adjust your audience, and if you continue to get great, this is awesome, I loved it, and they can say, well, it meant this to me, and that's what you were hoping for, maybe your revising is done, at least for now. You might come back to it in 5-10 years, but awesome, that's great. Other times we get good job, because we've shared our poem to an audience that isn't sure how to respond, and they love you and they're supportive, and maybe they're not that familiar with poetry, and they genuinely think, well, this is a good job, I could never do like this, wow, thank you for sharing this with me. And so one thing that you can do is, again, ask the person, well, what did you take away from the poem, again, to double check. And if the person says, oh, it was totally about bananas, and you were like, oh, don't tell them this, but in your heart, you're like, I was writing about pickup trucks, right? Then okay, maybe I need to share this with a different reader. Maybe I need to work on this a little bit more. And the next time you share your poem, you can also be more specific. When we talked about soliciting feedback, just asking someone who isn't well practiced at it to workshop your poem and saying, well, just read it and tell me what you think. That can be really overwhelming, and people aren't sure how to be helpful, and they don't want to be not helpful. So if their general response was, this was enjoyable, they're going to say good job. So you can be more specific, right? Could you read this poem and tell me, what picture you get in your head? Could you read this poem and tell me how you feel while you read it, right? If you give just one thing to look for, something very specific, that might help you get more meaningful feedback from people. So it's kind of a pendulum. And definitely, take those compliments, they're wins. Especially, people might point to specific places in your poem where an image or a simile, like something really resonated with them. And yeah, you're doing a good job. So embrace that. But if you're concerned that people are saying, this is a really successful poem, and you don't feel that way, then you can investigate that either by soliciting feedback in different ways, or putting it away in a drawer and coming back to it, or sometimes, going with popular opinion and maybe sending it out for publication and see what happens, and what kind of feedback you get from an editor or editorial panel. That might be the next step. Sometimes other people like our poems better than we do, if that makes sense. Responding to varied advice. So you saw in that one moment in my micro level suggestions that there was a line in the poem that some people were really digging, and some people were a little like, I don't know, I'm not really feeling that. And here, as you can see, just I looked for images that have buildings. I put in building and art, and here are 3 that came up right at the top of the image find, and I grabbed them right away because here, right, artists are representing city buildings in a wide variety of ways. And your readers are going to be just like that too. They are coming to your text with a lot of different contexts, different experiences, different levels of confidence, having read poetry and commented on it. And so you're going to get feedback that sometimes directly contradicts each other, and that's okay. We've all experienced where poems can mean different things to different people. And so, what you want to do is try to mitigate misunderstandings. And by misunderstanding, I'm really kind of thinking about people are interpreting your poem in a way that you do not intend, you're kind of not okay with, like, no, this is not done. And so you might think about, well, where are the places in the poem that people are pointing to that lead them to their understanding, thinking about what your goal is, and then being really flexible. Sometimes, if I've shared a poem and I'm like, whoa, I didn't even anticipate these three ways for people to think that this is what this is about. Like, I just left this way too open. What I'll do sometimes is come up with three different new versions, and I'll be looking at the content primarily as it is, unless something was like really pointed to as like, this threw me off. And I'll focus on changing the form of the poem to see if that makes a difference. And then sometimes, in the second one, I will really focus on the point of view, and revise the poem with that in mind, so it's absolutely changing the point of view even. And then the third one, what I'll do is work to try and clarify or explain, or come up with, maybe a different vehicle for trying to get people to where I want them to go in understanding what I'm trying to communicate. And sometimes having those three different options, and working on the poem in different ways helps me understand the poem better myself, helps me kind of appreciate the different points of view readers are coming from. And yes, in the end, I have four different versions of my poem, but I find that perspective often helps me kind of either identify the one that's working the best at that moment in time for me, that then I might move forward and invite a new reader or the same readers to come back to. Or I often find that in those revision exercises, kind of doing them on the back end rather than the front end, before I share work, those allow me to, kind of pull the best from all of those versions and come up with, uh, a new draft that I'm more pleased with. The other thing to consider, and this goes back to the poem that I shared with you, is revising a part of a whole. And so I think quilts are a wonderful illustration of this, where you can zoom into one square in a quilt or circle, or triangle, whatever the pattern is, and appreciate that as its own contribution to the quilt and its own piece of art. And then as you start to come back and you see all of those pieces fit together, they start to communicate kind of a bigger message or a larger narrative. And so sometimes, as in the case of the college plan, I might be having people asking for more from the speaker, more information. But if I'm thinking about putting it into a book with 20 poems, well, maybe all of that information doesn't need to be in that one poem. And I know that I need to have a poem about the speaker's brother and a poem about the speaker's three best friends before, right, that moment in the advisor's office. So people are kind of pulling in that information that they know about my speaker from past poems into that moment. And then those questions probably won't come up for those readers if they're reading in a sequence. So that is something to consider if you're working on a larger work. Considering what's around your poem might provide the context that readers are interested in. And sometimes you might find that you're working on poems kind of individually, and you realize as they're coming together as a whole, you might need to do something with the titles, or with dating things or numbering things or putting things in sections, right? You might choose to revise the poem to help it fit more seamlessly into the larger work and create a greater sense of continuity or uniformity. So it's always good to keep that in mind when we're beginning our poems. I mean, we are just pumping them out and we're so excited to explore all of our new strategies and all of the things we have in our minds and in our hearts and in our souls, and they're boom, just coming out. And so when you go through a period of revision, seeing whether or not some of those poems are in conversation with each other, or kind of building the sense of a character or persona, or watching kind of the evolution of how you think and feel about something, it can be really satisfying to start to kind of put them together as a group and as a set. And even if you're not working towards a book project per se, those might be a good group of poems to send off to a magazine for publication, so that the editors are kind of getting like a little mini set that go really well together. Or maybe if you're going to do a recording or share some stuff on social media, that can be a nice way of kind of giving a very satisfying experience to your readers when you have an opportunity to share more than one piece with them. So keeping that in mind is always a good idea. Skills practice this week. What I recommend you do is solicit feedback on a poem that you've been working on from 3 different readers. So you might have to go back to that list you made in a previous video on who are people you could share your work to, and pick 3 people to read the same poem. When your poem is out in those people's hands and you've given them specific instructions, what are you hoping to get from them? You take a little time to think about your poem's goal. What is your poem's message? What are you trying to achieve with it? When you get that feedback back, revise your poem and see if setting that intention for your poem's goal helps you navigate the feedback that you got from those readers and make decisions about what to change or not change in your poem. Another thing that you can do is take a poem that you have shared, save it as a new draft, right? So you have the old one preserved, it's not going to be touched. Take that goal for your poem, write it down, make it a touchstone, even if it's a post-it note that's going to sit on your desk. It doesn't have to be on the poem's file specifically. Look at the feedback that you've gotten and start with all of the comments that are big picture, talking about the poem's meaning, right? Make sure that the poem is communicating what you hope to communicate. And then look at the line level suggestions that your readers have made. Finally, once you've made changes or haven't made changes, read the poem out loud and see what the new experience is like. I recommend the closed drawer strategy after that. Let it sit for a few and then come back to it, and you can decide, are you ready to share more widely with readers? Do you feel like you need to go through another round of revision if you're looking at it and this still isn't quite exactly what I hope it will be? Looking ahead, we are going to continue to think about how we can shape our poems and move towards building a collection of work that we can share with others. So, thinking about those poems in concert with each other and working on our first, second, third, 12th collection of poetry. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope that taking time to reflect on what you've written helps you appreciate how much you've grown as a poet so far, and also gets you excited for all the potential to come. Thanks for joining me.